We are going to talk about population management, and I think probably most of us would agree that there are more pets around, and I include horses in that, than there are good homes. Is that because there's unlimited production? What could we do about that? Is it something to do with the attitude of society today that wants something, wants it now, and when it doesn't want it anymore, will just chuck it out? Is it something to do with the fact that the welfare organisations, Cats Protection, RSPCA and Dogs Trust, at least over the last couple of decades, have spent tens of millions of pounds on subsidised neutering, on education, always see the puppy or kitten with its mother, that sort of education, and what effect has that had? If you look at the PFMA annual statistics on pet numbers, you'll see that gradually over the years it's gone up, and for the first time this year it started to go down. Are we starting to see some success? So we have three speakers this afternoon who are going to give you their insight into it. One on horses, one on dogs, and one on cats. So without more ado, I'll hand over to Roly Owers, who's going to talk to you about horses.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great thanks to the Animal Welfare Foundation for inviting me to speak. An afternoon session focusing on too much sex. It's been a while since I've been to one of those. I noticed that the horses are going first, cats second, dogs third. I don't know what the organisers thought in that order, but it does make me fearful that this session has already gone to the dogs before the cats and the horses have a chance to have a look in. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about careless breeding. And so what? What does it matter that there is so much careless breeding of equines going on in the UK today? Very quickly, because I've only got 20 minutes, I will run through an overview as you see in front of you. But I do want to sort of focus a little bit on the end about what we as vets can take on with the challenge. Because one thing that will come through in my talk this afternoon, and I imagine in many of the other talks, is that it's all about partnership. There is no golden bullet for a solution to any of these problems. It's only in working together that we're going to make a real difference. So very briefly, some of you will know about World Horse Welfare, maybe some of you won't. Previously known as the International League for the Protection of Horses. We've been around for 90 years, and I'd like to say if we do have a unique selling point or a unique identity marker to World Horse Welfare, it's our caring and pragmatic approach to the variety of equine welfare issues that we face both in the UK and around the world that really is at the heart of what we do. It was the heart of why our founder set us up back in 1927. We run the largest rehoming scheme for horses in the UK. We're growing our international work in the developing world in partnership with charities like the Brook and Spana and the Donkey Sanctuary and World Animal Protection. And in terms of that pragmatic but caring approach to equine welfare, we do support the responsible use of horses in sport. So, what about breeding of equines in the UK? It is something we are extraordinarily good at. You only have to look at the thoroughbred world, you only have to look at the sport horse world, and indeed in the London Olympics, a number of British bred horses competing both for Britain but for many other nations around the world too. So whilst we are also very good at it, we can also be pretty awful at it too. And overbreeding is one of the biggest risks, is the biggest risk to equine welfare in the UK today. Now, of course, being an evidence-led profession, which we rightly should be, evidence with horses is somewhat basic when we can't even tell you how many horses there are in the UK. And indeed, as you'll see on the range there, from 390,000 to 1 million. That is an extraordinary spread. But give or take, we think, an educated guess is around 800,000. But indiscriminate breeding is now seen by the Equine Sector Council for Health and Welfare as a high risk, and the highest risk that we are facing in the UK today. You can't give horses away today. I think, obviously, in the top end of the market, the numbers have stacked up in sales over the past few years. But if there was a bottom end of the market and a value in that, there certainly isn't any more. We reckon today, we, World Horse Welfare, in conjunction with other charities, including the RSPCA, would put it, and this is probably a conservative estimate, at around 4,500 animals today at risk. That is a little down on the 7,000 that it was, but it's bound to go up next winter. And as you'll hear many times today, welfare charities are at capacity. So who is responsible for this problem? Well, in short, all of us are. Anyone who has a stakehold in the equine profession, in the equine sector, has a role to play. It's one thing, it's very easy to compartmentalise and say, well, it's all to do with travellers and dealers. There is no doubt that travellers and dealers have a large part to play. But it might surprise you to know that there are some very good travellers out there. There are some very good dealers out there. So I think it is very important we don't just try and shift that problem away either into the too difficult box or the box that's got nothing to do with me. So when we look at who is responsible, I think you can slice and dice this any which way you like. But if you look at the green there has been, and there's proof shown over the last few years, that the racing world, the sport horse world, has responded to market forces. It slightly depressed me over lunch when I was talking to someone who's involved in thoroughbred breeding and said actually some mares are now coming back to be put into foal that have no place to be. And I think that is a real challenge for us as the veterinary profession to see if we can do more to stop that. Over the years, in terms of the orange, the various charities, World Horse Welfare, Red Wings and the British Horse Society have done a huge amount to try and educate owners. And I think there is a huge amount to do there because many owners who will only breed one horse in their lifetime think they're not a problem. But in fact, because tens of thousands of people are breeding just one horse, that adds up to a lot of animals. But of course, what I want to just focus on today in the brief time I've got is to look at those red challenges, the indiscriminate breeders, those who breed without a single or a very few much of a focus on the equine welfare implications of what we're doing. So why do people indiscriminately breed their animals? There's all sorts of motivations for doing it. And indeed, I think it was a couple of years ago at this very meeting, we looked at the whole issue of hoarders. And I think what I've just tried to identify here is that you've got two sort of almost diametrically opposed groups of people, both whom indiscriminately breed. One on the and is those who care so much for their animals, they'll just graze them wherever they like without a will for the welfare of those animals or indeed the land which they're grazing on. And in these people's eyes, the horses have very low emotional value. Quite the opposite is the case with hoarders. There's been quite a lot of research done more in the small animal world than within the equine world. But here, these animals have very high emotional value. So fly or illegal grazing, if you're not familiar with fly grazing, we reckon in England today there are around 3,000 animals that are being fly grazed. Now, they'll be in groups of 1 to 2 to 100 to 200 and sometimes more. And, you know, many of you will have seen these. You go through the Dartford Tunnel, you go around the Severn Estuary, you'll see a lot of animals being fly grazed. That's animals that are being grazed where they do not have permission to do so. And this whole sort of culture within this world is very much or sink or swim. At a World Horse Welfare Conference 3 years ago, John Grant, who's an RSPCA Chief Inspector, who was born into a travelling family, he said there are two ways to get to the top in the travelling world. One is you fight your way to the top, and the other is that you breed the best horses. And that really is true. In terms of hoarding, as I've said, it's completely the other end of the scale. It is recognised now as a psychiatric condition, and there's all sorts of research that's gone into that. RSPCA Australia did a big piece of research around this, but of course the real problem with hoarders is that they think they are doing the right thing. And indeed, in many ways, their initial starting point is in the right place. They want to care for these animals. They just very quickly come incapable of doing so for a variety of reasons. So what is the impact of all of this? Well, it goes without saying, it's been an extraordinary rise in the number of welfare problems that all the welfare charities are seeing. 2 years ago, Wales Horse Welfare had a 78% increase in the number of animals we took into our 4 centres than the year before. We thought that was a one-off. Tragically, it's not. It is exceeded that in 2014, and every indication that we're going to exceed that level in 2015 too. Rather than dealing with cases of 1 or 2 animals, we're often dealing in cases between 10 and 50, indeed more than that. In December 2013, we took in a case into our Norfolk Centre from Surrey that involved 63 cases. Our field officers, we have 16 field officers who cover the full breadth of the country, they spend an inordinate amount of time, especially with hoarding cases. We are really trying to win people round, because actually at the end of the day, that's what you've got to do. A few years ago, we would obviously always have very strict biosecurity measures, and we'd have the odd strangles case come in. Now we assume they've all got strangles, because they almost invariably do. And as we'll see very briefly, enforcement in many of these cases is nigh on impossible. But what can we do? There is a role for everyone to play. So that's a sort of another take-home message from the day, from central government to horse owners to vets. Many of you will know from the central government point of view that the Control of Horses Act came into force last month, which is really good news. It'll only be good news, though, if local authorities and private landowners do it. But you so often hear when we talk about an overbreeding crisis that we have in this country, we should be licensing stallions and other issues like that. One thing, having been at Wales Horse Welfare now for a few years, legislation is very, very rarely the answer. It plays a really important role, don't get me wrong, but so often it is not the answer, because as soon as you have legislation, as we heard this morning, you've got to have someone to enforce it. And if you don't enforce it, it simply won't happen. And that's why we certainly believe that stallion licensing won't work. But there is things that central government can do, and the number one thing it can do, it can bring in an equine identification system that works. Without it, you cannot enforce a single piece of equine health or welfare legislation or anything to do with horses. And as you'll hear more in the canine world, there is so much more the government could do to help control the route of animals in and out of this country across to the continent. Of course, local government can do so much because it's up to them to do the enforcement. And obviously they have played a great role in our current work with DEFRA to try and bring about an equine identification system in the wake of the horse meat scandal that really does work. Local authorities in a number of areas work really well in partnership with the police, with the local welfare charities and national welfare charities, but in so many other parts of the country, they don't work. But of course, this is the number one message. There's only going to be a really sustained and effective impact on overbreeding unless we can have a system which really does reward those who look after their animals, and there's real consequences for those who don't. Because tragically at the moment, you can pretty much do anything to an animal, and 9 times out of 10, or indeed 99 times out of 100, you'll get away with it. There have to be consequences for irresponsible ownership. Then we may be able to start to get a handle on irresponsible breeding. The sector itself has got a huge role to play. As I already said, we believe self-regulation in terms of breeding is the only sustainable way forward. But we do have to speak with one voice with that, and we have to really work together to make that happen. Horse owners, obviously, the responsibility of horse ownership is immense. There are huge benefits accrued from having horses. I know now, having 2 children who love their animals, and I'm going through it all again. But it really is, there's so much benefit that has from horse ownership, but there's obviously a responsibility that goes with that. And that breeding responsibly, obviously that's coming back to very much the yellow category that I was talking about earlier. And in terms of the way we control disease and ensuring that we follow the HBLB codes of practice, it's so important. Charities, we do have a role to play, of course we do, and we recognise that we are not going to be the golden answer to this, but we do have a helpful role that we can play. The British Horse Society recently have set up a number of castration clinics which are running round the country in conjunction with a number of other welfare organisations as well as the local authorities. But of course we know these castration clinics, they're not going to have any effect on the number of animals that are bred overall, but they can have a real starting point, a real selling point to a lot of these owners who need to have that message sort of drummed into them about the responsibility of ownership. And of course, the whole issue of hoarders, there's not enough time to talk about it today, but we know that the cases involving hoarders do take an extraordinary amount of time, and you've got to take it step by step. It's not a world for anyone who's suffers from impatience. Possibly more controversially, the meat industry also has a role to play. The reality is that most of the 3,000 animals that are being fly grazed around England today, none of them could go into the human food chain anyway because they don't have the documentation to be able to do so. But there is obviously moves across Europe, and whether it will ever come to fruition, to actually allow a 6-month amnesty. So if an animal is free, in this case, majorly when we talk about drugs and horses and the food chain, you're talking about bute. If an animal has 6 months exclusion, then potentially it could go in the human food chain. Now, clearly, that is not the answer for the vast majority of British owners who love their animals, would never dream of sending it to the abattoir, but it does have a role to play for some. And then, of course, we as vets, what role can we play? There is, as I said at the beginning, a huge role in terms of partnership. I think it's so important for the frontline vets to think that they're not on their own, obviously within the practice, but then of course with local organisations and national organisations like World Horse Welfare, there is a huge amount we can do. And indeed, many of your clients that you may be struggling with may be people that we're already in contact with, because obviously we get calls from the members of the general public every single day of the year. And so it may be that we have come across those cases already. I do think there is a bigger role for vets to play in querying, indeed maybe challenging their clients on why they are breeding. And one of the things that we often say at World Horse Welfare is that I think you should assume that you're not going to breed from your mare until you convince yourself that you are, rather than the other way round, because there are huge responsibility that goes with breeding. And of course, every animal that is born into a market that is saturated, and that's what the equine market in the UK is at the moment, risks putting another animal at risk. And as I said, partnership working is what it's all about. So, careless breeding, so what? I would say careless breeding, so an awful, awful lot. Discriminate and indiscriminate breeding is an issue for us all to take on board. We have to really challenge people why they are breeding, and we have to work harder to intervene, not on our own, but together. And I would say this, wouldn't I, having only done a small time of work in general practice, but vets are in a privileged position. You may not think your owners and your clients listen to you, but they will listen to you possibly quite a lot more than they will listen to someone from their local authority or indeed from the local charity. So I do think that is the take-home message. Please, let's work in partnership, and we really can get a better handle on indiscriminate breeding in the UK today. I haven't even got an orange light, so I must be under time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roly. We're going to talk about cats next. So here's Maggie Roberts from Cats Protection.
Hello everyone. I'm very grateful to have been asked to speak to you about cats this afternoon. I'm the only lady on the panel, so yes, I am the mad cat lady. Anyway, I am the Director of Veterinary Services at Cats Protection. We are the UK's largest feline welfare organisation. And I've been asked to talk to you about the timing of neutering today. Neutering is one of our main objectives, and we do run what is reputedly the largest single species neutering scheme in the world. Last year, we helped to support the neutering of about 163,000 cats in the UK. So it's a lot of cats, yet we still have a bit of a problem. This poster is one of the posters that we've used in some of our awareness raising to try and get people to neuter their cats earlier. So what is the extent of the problem of overpopulation in cats in the UK? There's been various different surveys done about the actual numbers of cats, and we get ranging figures from 8 to about 10 million. So we're not quite sure, but that sort of range, a fairly similar number to the number of dogs. It's estimated that there's 1 to 2 million feral cats in the UK. Nobody really has any idea. It's a real finger in the air sort of figure. But probably it's a far greater number than we actually think. Often when we visit places in Southern Europe, you see lots of street cats, lots of feral cats, and we don't necessarily think there's a huge problem in the UK, but actually there's a lot of both urban and rural feral cats. And they do contribute to the issue of the overpopulation in the UK. It's estimated that over 150,000 cats go through registered charities every year. And that's really an underestimation of the total number of cats needing help, because that doesn't include all the little Mrs. Miggins people who, have local cat rescue. And if you think how many vets in practice actually rehome quite a lot of cats every year where stray RTAs end up at the surgery. So that figure's probably much more like about 250,000. And all these charities, all the registered charities, are pretty much constantly full. So actually, there's many more cats needing help than we can actually provide that help for. And about 13% are euthanized. So that's quite a high number. That includes those that are euthanized because of health issues or behavioural issues, and also euthanized purely because of numbers. In terms of money, an estimate from one study was that it was over £340 million that the registered charities spend on rehoming dogs and cats. And again, that's a vast underestimation, because there's all this pro bono work being done by vets, all sorts of local charities. So it's probably nearer £500 million. So it's a huge amount of money. So what about legislation on cat breeding? Nothing. There is no legislation in the UK on cat breeding. There's actually very little legislation on cats, on anything really. Obviously they are covered by the Animal Welfare Act, and there's various other laws such as sort of pet vending, etc. But there's nothing specifically about cat breeding. There has recently, in the sort of cat welfare world, been discussions about whether the introduction of legislation similar to the legislation on the breeding of dogs, whether that would have a beneficial effect. The jury's a bit out on that. There has been a private members' bill that's been was entered in the ballot and will be read sometime in June, where if people are breeding more than a certain number of queens, they would have to be registered and licensed. But the problems are more complex than that, as I'll go on to say. To talk a little bit about neutering, and obviously I'm hopefully talking to an audience that's already converted. Obviously it is viewed as the most humane way that we can control the feline population. Research sort of indicates that we need to neuter more than 90% of the population if we're just going to keep the population at a stable level. The alternative is to actually kill half the cats in the UK every year. So that's probably not going to be terribly acceptable to the general public. And traditionally, most practices would advise their clients to get cats neutered at 6 months of age. Now, there's no science at all behind this, One of my theories is that in the past, more vets were men than women and had bigger hands, and they sort of thought that trying to spay younger cats was going to be a bit fiddly. Obviously, there was concerns about things like anaesthetic protocols and various issues like that, but there's no science behind the figure of 6 months. So why don't people neuter their cats? Interestingly, cost is not top of the list. This research was done by the RSPCA a couple of years ago, but fits in, I think, with certainly my general experience, that although cost can be a factor, apathy is actually the biggest reason why people don't bother to get their cats neutered. They just don't really think about it or don't get round to it, certainly until Equine has already had a litter. And there's a huge amount of ignorance and still many, many myths going around with the general public. Of course, every cat should have a litter, shouldn't they, before they're neutered? It's like saying that every 14-year-old girl should have a baby. And there's very anthropomorphic views, oh, it's cruel, etc. Cost does come into it, and also practicalities. We sometimes have people that we're dealing with that their reason why they haven't got the cat neutered is they don't have a cat basket. Some people see having kittens as positive, the nice, yummy mummies who'd like their children to witness the miracle of life, or people who want to sell the kittens. Some people from a cultural or religious, for religious reasons, don't want to neuter. Obviously, it is the ultimate form of contraception. Many cats are just acquired spontaneously, and therefore they're not always perceived as having any sort of real value, or certainly not financial value. And unsurprisingly, if an owner isn't registered with a vet, for example, they've never had the kitten vaccinated, then obviously they're much less likely ever to get their cat neutered. And just to emphasise a little bit more about the sort of poor owner knowledge, in one survey that was done by Philippa Welsh at Bristol, it turned out that about 80% of litters are actually accidental. People are not planning them. But I think the really scary thing is nearly half of the people who were interviewed thought that cats should have a litter before they were neutered, or they weren't sure about it, which I think is pretty scary. About a quarter of people thought that a cat couldn't get pregnant before they were a year old, and more than a third thought that related cats couldn't mate. And I'm sure, everyone's come across those people in practice who are horrified that the brother and sister kittens start getting rather friendly. In another questionnaire of owners, where we were looking at numbers of cats neutered, we found that actually a huge number of cats over 6 months are neutered. In this survey, it was 92%. In other surveys, it's been similar figures, high 90s, 90%. So you think, well, why do we still have a problem? When you look at the specific age band between 6 and 12 months, actually only about 2/3 of the cats in that age bracket are neutered. And in actual fact, about 1/5 of females do have a litter before they're neutered. And in this survey, the figure was about 71% were unplanned, so similar to the other surveys. So huge numbers of kittens are born just as an accident. So what can we conclude from this? And I think it really indicates that although lots of cats are neutered, many are not being neutered early enough. Many are having a litter before they are neutered. So it's crucial that we do neuter them pre-puberty. And obviously, owners' ignorance plays a big part in that. So as I said, we really should be neutering cats before they reach puberty. Many will have already reached puberty by 6 months. Some come into season at about 4 months of age. So the recommended age for ordinary domestic-owned cats is around 4 months. And many people don't know, even within the profession, that the BVA, BSAVA guidance actually does say 4 months. And other groups, such as the Cat Group, which is a group of organisations interested in cats, also promotes 4 months as a standard age for neutering. There's a huge amount of scientific evidence demonstrating the safety of doing neutering at this earlier age. A lot of it comes from the States because they have actually been carrying out prepubertal neutering for many decades in the States and also in places like Australia and New Zealand. So there's a lot of scientific evidence. I haven't got time today to go into that in huge detail. I'll mention a few things later, but it is safe at this age. A question we've been discussing in the cat welfare sector recently is, should we call it early neutering? Does that make it sound a bit scary? Does it make it sound different, that we're doing something to little babies? Should we call it prepubertal neutering? Well, I think that's fine for the profession. We should really call it PPG, prepubertal gonadectomy. Gosh, I managed to actually say that. It's okay. Or timely neutering, well, you still have to know what timely means. So we're trying to now promote the term kitten neutering. Again, that might be perceived as being a bit scary, but it sounds slightly less bad than calling it early. So what are the advantages of early neutering? Obviously, the main reason why I'm talking about it today is about population control, but there are lots of advantages for the cats themselves. It is simpler, it is safer, and it is less painful surgery, and those facts have been proved scientifically. And if you look at the picture that we've got up today, obviously you can see that there's very, very little fat around the uterus, and there's very little intra-abdominal fat. The blood vessels are tiny, so actually the risk of bleeding and sort of perioperative problems like that are really negligible. They do recover much, much quicker than older cats. We sometimes neuter a mother with her 8-week-old kittens, because we neuter earlier for rehoming reasons. And the kittens are always awake much, much earlier than the mother. So it's a really good recovery rate. Obviously, for rescues, it's great that we can neuter cats before they're home, so we don't have to chase up and find out if the new owner has actually neutered the cat. And a lot of breeders, pedigree breeders, want to get their kittens that are not going to be used for breeding and showing, to get them neutered before they sell them. For those of you who do any work with trap, neuter and return of feral cats, you'll know that once you've trapped a feral, you will never, ever get that cat in a trap again. So we want to be able to neuter anything that we can trap. And I've certainly neutered cats down to about 6 weeks of age, feral cats that we've caught. If you release them, you'll never get them again. And obviously, if they are neutered early, then you're going to decrease the level of things like having to do pregnant spays, seeing mammary tumours, pyometras, etc. So there's lots of advantages for the individual. There are quite a few perceived risks associated with early neutering, and we've only got time to touch on these today, but I think it's quite interesting. And these are a list that came up when vets were asked, what are your worries about early neutering? And obviously the biggest worries were the risks involved with anaesthetic and surgical procedures. There was worry about increasing the risk of urinary tract disease, risk of fractures because of late growth plate closure. Lots of people, certainly the general public, think that these kittens are going to be stunted, but actually growth continues longer, so they're slightly taller. It's a bit like the eunuchs that looked after the Vestal Virgins in ancient Rome were tall. So that's how I always remember that they're taller if they're early neuters. You'll never forget that now. And they're worried about obesity as well. But there's lots and lots of information about anaesthesia and surgical techniques now, so that really isn't a worry for most people who've carried out the procedure. Obviously, things like the obesity issue, well, we do know that actually there is a slight increase in risk of obesity in neutered animals. And that's so we can't say it isn't necessarily an issue, but there's no difference between animals that were done pre-puberty or post-puberty, and that's the same with urinary tract disease. And there was one study where the urethral diameter of male cats was looked at in 3 different groups, one where they'd been neutered at 7 weeks, another group at 7 months, and another left entire. And there was no difference in the urethral diameter between the early and later neutered cats. As regards the fractures with growth plate closure, actually you get the highest incidence of fractures caused by road accidents in entire cats, particularly entire toms, because they wander so much, and so there are high levels of RTAs in that group. So how can we encourage vets to neuter cats earlier? Well, I think education and training really are the most important things, and that's why organisations like Cats Protection are really trying to encourage vet students to learn more about early neutering. And so we do have students carrying out EMS with us, and many of the other charities, the RSPCA, etc., have students there as well, so that we can get them to be exposed and actually have a go at early neutering. And it's really important that we do disseminate all the scientific evidence as widely as possible. As has been mentioned several times today already, we should be working on evidence-based medicine. And so, you know, it's really important that we do get all the information out there, and on neutering at different ages, so that people have all the scientific information. Also, we need everyone to work together, and there's a group called the Cat Population Control Group that was formed a couple of years ago, mainly of charities, but also some academics and veterinary organisations, really to bring everyone together so we can share resources, but also so we can try and get consistent messaging about what age we should be neutering cats, and to help get the scientific message out there, to promote earlier neutering, kitten neutering, whatever we want to call it, and also to sort of get the message across, particularly with charities and people working perhaps on ferals, etc., that if we've got limited resources, we really ought to be concentrating on neutering the female cats. Obviously, it's good to castrate males, cats, as well as other species. But in terms of controlling number, you have much greater effect if you get as many females as possible. And certainly when people are involved in neutering feral colonies, the really important thing is to get all the females. Part of the work that the Cat Population Control Group's been doing is developing what's called the Kitten Neutering Database. This is a microsite on the Cats Protection website. And it's kind, so that we can promote it to the public, that it is kind to get your cat spayed. And we have a database of practices across the UK that will do neutering at 4 months or less. So members of the public or other smaller charities can put their postcode in and find a practice that will carry out the procedure. We have nearly 1,200 practices on that list now. It's a bit slow to start, but we did find it was quite effective at BSAVA to get vets to look and see who else in their area was doing it, and then they soon signed up. We're also getting a new database of what we're calling kitten neutering champions, and these are vets who are happy and confident doing the procedure, who are happy to mentor other vets, so that they can invite them to the practice and they can actually see the procedure for themselves. Because, you know, we've produced DVDs and lots of information, but I think a lot of vets feel until they've actually seen the procedure being done, they've seen the good recovery of the kittens, they're a little bit reluctant to do it themselves. So if they can watch it being done, I think that will help. A lot of the technical and research data is on our website as well. And there's this useful app and details about that called the Kitten Quad. The Kitten Quad is one of the anaesthetic protocols that works extremely well for kitten neutering, but it's worked out on a body surface area method of dosing. And if you're anything like me, I can't remember that complicated equation on how to work out body surface area. So with this app, you just literally type in the weight of the cat and it just automatically tells you the amount of the 4 agents that are being used. And that's available for iPhone and for Android. And I'm sounding like I know what all that means. But for those of you who are into apps, it's really, really handy. And our video, which shows real-time procedure of an early neuter, is on there, both male and female. There's a shorter version, a sort of 12A version on our public website. We had to sort of edit it a little bit because when we tried it on some of our staff, 2 people fainted. it was quite interesting because they were both female and they both fainted at the same time. And it was when one of the ovaries was being tugged, which I think you would faint if that happened to you. So I thought that was quite interesting. So what next? I think it's really important that we do actually monitor the cat population in the UK, both domestic and feral, carefully. And it's not always as easy as possible. Oh, I've got red flashing light. And we want to measure how many we are neutering, what's the average age. And certainly for us as an organisation, we want to see how effective we're being. So obviously education, both for the profession and the public, are really important. I'm being flashed at. Anyway, this was my Secret Santa present a couple of years ago. I wanted to use this as a campaign slogan. I've got the balls to early neuter. Some people thought it was a bit in bad taste, but someone made that for me. So thank you very much.
Sorry about your man. Thank you, Maggie. I can tell you as an old vet with not such big hands, it was largely because we were using thiopentone and ether to anaesthetise kittens. You didn't do them before 6 months. So our third presentation on dogs then is from David Martin. David, over to you.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me back to talk to you again. I spoke to you a couple of years ago in respect of what was going on in livestock shows, but this time you've been asked me to come and talk to you about dogs and the overpopulation issues with them, or in actual fact, I think it's more of an undersupply in the UK. UK requirement is at a guesstimate is that there is about a need for 800,000 puppies a year to maintain the UK dog population, and that's what the public wants to be acquiring a year. The question is where those puppies are going to come from, because there isn't 800,000 puppies being bred in the UK this year, as far as we can tell. There is definitely a market for designer dogs and fashionable crossbreeds. I'm quite sure there are plenty in the audience who remember where crossbreeds were either given away or sold for 50 quid, and adverts were put on the practices notice boards, and the only time that you got a Labradoodle was if the gamekeeper's Labrador got out. Now they are highly sought after. People are paying between £500 to £1,000 for some of these crossbreeds, and the public wants them. And like everything else that the public wants, it wants them now, and it wants them instantly. The public clearly wants homebred, healthy puppies, doesn't want to be thinking it's buying them from puppy farms, and certainly doesn't want to be thinking it's buying them from places abroad where they may be at risk of bringing diseases into the country. The problem we've got is that there, as I've already suggested, there aren't enough of these dogs that are homebred, socialised, and brought up nicely, appropriately vet-checked and healthy. There is, however, a supply of them. The majority of the supply of them is no longer in this country. Part of that is due to the success of the Animal Welfare Act. Section 9, allowing the authorities to make breeders and owners of animals make improvements before the animals start suffering, has led to a lot of the worst puppy farms in England and Wales and Scotland disappearing. They have either been shut down completely or they have improved their facilities. There is, however, a large supply of puppies just over the water in Ireland, where you can buy puppies for €50. There is also a large supply of puppies in Eastern Europe, where again, you can buy puppies for 35, 40, 50 euros. That's a hell of a difference when you can then sell them for 500, 600, 700 or more pounds in this country. The problem you've got is those puppies are being bred in what we would call puppy farms, and the Americans call puppy mills. Whether the welfare of the puppies in these places is acceptable or not probably comes down to your opinion. Some of the Irish ones are certainly licensed by the authorities, but I don't think they would be licensed over here, and I don't think the British public would consider their welfare to be appropriate if they knew where they were coming from. So we've got a demand, and we've got a market, and we have a supply. The only question is how you get them here, because The British public wants its puppies at 8 to 10 weeks old. You can't get them in legally till they're 15 weeks old. The public isn't greatly interested in 15-week-old puppies. They've gone past the cute stage. However, this is where the problems are coming in. Organised crime has now come into the puppy trade. This is not an exaggeration. I have had personal dealings with a large number of organisations who are dealing in illegal puppies and selling them off to the public extremely successfully and conning sensible, educated people who are not buying puppies in lay-bys and at service stations. They have got intelligent. They have evolved their networks. They divide into two types. The first stage is the transporters. And these are the guys who are and girls who are bringing things in from Ireland and from Eastern Europe and supplying them to the second stage, which are the dealers, who are then advertising them and selling them to the general public and our clients. The first thing that we have a problem with is weak border controls. This is allowing the transporters virtually free access to the market. If I tell you that at Dover and at Eurostar, the microchip checks are not conducted by border agency staff, they're not conducted by trading standards, they're not conducted by APHA in the main, they're conducted by the ferry company staff. How are we expecting those staff to make determinations as to whether a puppy is 10 or 15 weeks of age? Particularly, as often they don't even see it. If you get in your car in France and come through on the ferry, there is no dedicated check-in space. The person in the booth hands the microchip reader through the passenger window, and the passenger of the car reads the microchip. They can't see, the person in the booth, what's going on, because they can't see from the angle of which they're at the back of the car. They could be reading anything. There may be one puppy read and 10 puppies in the back of the car. There is no legal way for them to search the cars while in France, because it's banned by treaty. How can we seriously expect to stop puppies coming in when that is the situation? If you go via Eurostar, it's slightly different. They have a dedicated pets check-in. You take your pet into the building. You get given the microchip reader. Once again, the way it's set up, the person behind the desk cannot see the microchips being read. It is very easy for a microchip to be stuck on the bottom of the collar and no one will be any the wiser. That's the dogs that get taken in to the check-in desk. How many dogs don't go into the check-in desk? How many puppies stay in the cars? Dover Animal Health Agency, Plant Agency, office is only manned Monday to Friday. Kent Trading Standards, with responsibility to enforcement, offer no out-of-hours service. Is it any surprise that the majority of the puppy trade, which we know comes on what is referred to as the post bus, which is like a minibus that the Eastern Europeans use to bring people and possessions into this country, come between 6 o'clock Friday and 1 o'clock Sunday lunchtime, when there is no enforcement actions effectively, and there's no support to the Eurostar staff or the ferry staff to be able to deal with things. It's not much better if you go to Holyhead and Fishguard and the Irish ports. There's virtually no enforcement at them either. Now, for the Dover and the ferries, I thoroughly recommend that you read the Dogs Trust report on the actions of the ports and what's going on in Eastern Europe. The RSPCA ran a 4-day operation in the ports on the west coast dealing with the Irish ferries. They only ran it during the daytime because they didn't have facilities and staff to be able to run it 24/7. They ran their operation for 4 days. They could only stop vehicles that they believed to be suspicious. The guy who was involved in this told me basically this means they were driving a white van and when he knocked on the side of it, he'd hear a dog barking. Undoubtedly, they didn't pick up most of them. Out of the vehicles that they persuaded Border Agency to stop in those 4 days, they found 120 puppies. Not a single one of those puppies had the correct documentation. None of those puppies were turned back by Border Agency. Rather concerningly, he tells me that one van just refused to stop and drove straight out the port. Now, how can that be good customs control? If you don't stop, you don't have to. They stopped it on the way back, and they found receipts for 54 puppies. I slightly wonder what else he was carrying, because I don't suppose he refused to stop for 54 puppies, because if he goes through regularly, he knows that they wouldn't have had any problem with it at all. One of the vans that was stopped on the way out, and then was stopped on the way back, the driver was carrying £30,000 in cash. That's the money he'd made selling the puppies that he had in his van. These puppies that they bought for €50 in Ireland, they sell to the dealers for about £200. The dealers then advertise them to the public, and they do it through the internet, and they do it through sites such as these. They're not stupid. They create aliases. So all those, not all of those adverts, a lot of those adverts on the sites are actually all put there by the same people, with umpteen different names and umpteen different mobile phone numbers. How do they keep track of all these? If you go into one of these dealers' headquarters, as I've done, you'll find 30 or 40 mobile phones on the table. Each one on the back has a sticker. It has the alias that they've placed the advert in and the breed that they've placed it for. So when that phone rings, they know who they are. And I've spent time in some of these as joint raids, and the phones ring constantly. It does your head in. The police ended up, after an hour, turning all the phones off because no one could think, because one was ringing about every minute. We all use this advice when our clients come to us and ask us what they should look for and how they should tell that they're not going to get ripped off when they go to buy a nice new puppy. We tell them to make sure they buy from a private seller, to see the mother and probably the father, to get the references from other purchasers, make sure it's had all its appropriate prophylactic treatments, and don't buy puppies that look ill or are badly cared for. Great. Unfortunately, organised crime ain't stupid. They've got round every single one of these now, routinely. What they do is they buy these big batch of puppies, 40, 50 puppies at a time, from the transporters. They tend to hold them in a central house or central location. That's where they run their operation from. They then have stooge houses. And these are houses that they rent for short periods of time. And they furnish 1, maybe 2 rooms in it. They put some coats in the hall. They stick a few shoes under the stairs. They stick a TV and a sofa in the lounge and stick a picture on the wall and a few knickknacks on the mantelpiece. That's where they're going to sell the puppies from. There's only ever going to be 1 or 2 puppies in there. It's not going to stink of dogs. It's not going to be sounding like there's 50 dogs in the back barking their heads off, because there isn't. It's going to look like someone's front room, because effectively it is. When they place the adverts and the owners ring up, often they get given directions to a local petrol station or a pub or somewhere local to the house. The reason they do that is to give the dealers time to get to the house with the puppies. But it also has another advantage. Then they'll give them directions to where the stooge house is, and they'll say something like, it's the one with the green car on the drive. They don't give out the number of the house, and often these are in big built-up areas. So if the purchaser comes back later on to complain, it makes it slightly harder to work out which of the houses it was, particularly if the green car's no longer on the drive. It just gives them that extra little edge. So the purchasers go in, and they see these 1 or 2 puppies in these nice clean houses with these nice respectful people who tell a nice story. There's often a female dog and even a male dog running around, and they're presented as the dam and the sire of the dog, despite the fact they're not. But most of the public wouldn't recognise that. They are merely there as props. If you ask for references from other purchasers, they'll give you them. They'll get one of the other gang on one of the other mobile phones to give them to you, or they'll make them up themselves. They make sure these puppies have been prophylactically treated. There are members of our profession who are routinely and knowingly providing services to these dealers. Anyone who's having 15, 20 puppies bought in a week, all which have foreign microchips in, and different breeds coming every week, has to be turning a blind eye to something. Either they're a UK English-based puppy farm, or something dodgy's going on, And there are practices who are not asking questions and are just taking the money. And I think the profession has something to do about that. Finally, the don't buy puppies that are ill or badly cared for. I know we've all banged on about this endlessly to our clients. And unfortunately, human nature being what human nature is, if they do get a sick puppy, they feel sorry for it and buy it anyway. But a lot of these puppies are not being sold looking particularly sick. Often they've been medicated by the dealer. I've known dealers give puppies for sale Serenia, metoclopramide, to try and stop them being sick. I've seen them fill them up with kaolin to try and stop them having diarrhea. Give them antibiotics to stop them coughing. We talked earlier this morning about appropriate use of antibiotics. Some of these dealers have got not a clue at all. Draxin's quite good in puppies, apparently. Not that it's licensed, but I've seen plenty of puppy dealers with bottles of it. They certainly don't have cows in the backyard. One of the major problems we've got, other than the leaky borders, is the legislation. The Animal Welfare Act is brilliant, but it's not well enforced in dealing situations. The people who should be enforcing this are trading standards. Trading standards have no budget. Trading standards cannot afford to prosecute someone for having one dog. You now ring trading standards up and tell them you've got 50 dodgy puppies that have been, in your belief, illegally imported. They can't afford to do anything about it. There aren't quarantine places to put them if they wanted to. And if you ask APHA, they don't have the advice to give you. I have removed 50 puppies from a single establishment that I know were illegally imported. I rung APHA. The advice I was given, give them a rabies injection. What is the point of rabies vaccinating puppies that are already here? The penalties associated with these, for animal welfare offences, the maximum you get is 6 months in prison. Have a look at the cattle identification regulations. If you don't put ear tags in your cows, you can go down for 2 years. You're much better beating them semi-unconscious with a brick and putting the ear tag in them. You're only going to get 6 months. Solutions. And I'd be very happy for anyone who can come up with anything that will help solve this. I really, really, really believe that we need to reclassify the animal welfare legislation to be indictable as well as summary only. That will allow substantial prison sentences to be attached to the most severe offences. So people who are torturing their animals, people who are doing what some of these dealers are doing, people who are willfully neglecting large numbers of animals, such as the horses you've heard from Roly, for commercial purposes, actually get a sentence that makes them stop and think. Because I can tell you that these puppy dealers have given up drug dealing. They've given up cigarette importing because there's as much money to be made in this and considerably less risk. I've seen dealers that are making £100,000 cash a month from selling puppies. They consider 6 months in prison, in which they'll be out in 3, a very, very low price to pay, because they'll get out in 3 and they'll be still driving their Mercedes and wearing their Rolexes. We need to have proper enforcement of the border restrictions. The staff need to be trained. They need to be able to actually and insist on actually seeing the animals and reading the microchips themselves. And they need to have access to support in terms of vets 24/7. There's no good expecting Eurostar to pick up a puppy that they think is suspicious at 8 o'clock on a Friday night if they can't do anything with it. We need to have another look at the pets passport legislation. The changes in the passports that were designed to stop them being used fraudulently are great. I've never seen a forged pets passport, but what I have seen is lots of genuine ones that are signed and stamped by Eastern European vets and the rest of it's blank. You can buy these for €60 in Hungary and Lithuania. All signed, all stamped, you fill in what you want. Fill in the details. I would suggest that we need to have a minimum age at which puppies can come into this country. And I would suggest 6 months. It will kill the trade dead. How many people want to buy a 6-month-old puppy? And we need, and this is perhaps something that this audience can usefully start to put its brains together, new advice and guidance to the public on how to buy puppies. Because the advice and guidance we've got isn't up to the job any longer. It was great when they were selling in motorway service stations and in lay-bys, but they're not stupid. I've watched these gangs who used to sell in those situations now using stooge houses. We need to evolve as well. And finally, can I just say a big thank you to Paula Boyden and the Dogs Trust, who have helped me with lots of information about Dover and Pets Passport. Ian Mutton and Ian Briggs, who are Special Operations Unit at the RSPCA, who ran the operations at the Welsh ports and very kindly gave me all their data. And Kat Thorburn, who was the person who took me to my first puppy job and has kept taking them to me ever since, and is no doubt the reason I'm here. So a big thank you to all of them.
Well, thank you to all three of our speakers. If you weren't depressed when you came in, you will be now. Just to depress you even further, I know of one instance where one of these puppy dealers actually had a pet shop license to deal puppies through a house. He used to keep a couple of Shih Tzus, he imported Shih Tzu puppies and got them from puppy farms in Wales and Ireland and sold them as puppies from the one Shih Tzu bitch that he owned under a pet shop license. So, questions? Where can we start? Yes.
Hi, my name is Mark Hidberg from the College of Animal Welfare. I just wanted to say I've really enjoyed all three of these sessions. And with my first job in the UK, I worked in Dover as well. And all I can say is thank you. Yep. Yes, sir. It's all there. But on a serious note, though, you were talking about better enforcement, and at the same time, we're talking about increasing the importation to 6 months. If the enforcement now is no good, how will changing the minimum age change? Because they'll just smuggle in the puppies anyway.
I think, yes. The first thing to say is it's very difficult for anybody to tell the difference between a 10-week-old puppy and a 15-week-old puppy. If we move to 6-month puppies, it'll be a lot easier to argue when they try and bring 8- and 10-week-old puppies through that they're not 6 months. But the two have got to go hand in hand. There's got to be proper enforcement. And I suspect Roly would say exactly the same thing in relation to the low-value horses that come through. It's all got to be properly enforced.
Absolutely, I would. And I think the reality is we all recognise we live in a government where public funding is very limited. So I think you've always got to have a view to sort of realistic, practical solutions. And the reality is, as we've already heard, animal welfare organisations, Dogs Trust, RSPCA, Cats Protection, and certainly World Horse Welfare, we have a wealth of information, and it's so often we know who these guys are. So it's the old cry of intelligence-led enforcement. So actually, the money that is being spent on enforcement is being spent in a really effective way. There are so many people in the horse world who, if you own a thoroughbred and come through Dover, you'll get stopped. Why do you get stopped? Because it's a lovely box-ticking exercise for a local authority to get away with at a Friday lunchtime. Be there on a Sunday evening when these low financial value animals are coming through, no one's there.
I think you'll find that if you talk to Dogs Trust, they'll say their consignments of dogs coming in from Ireland get stopped every time because they can tick the paperwork off because they know it'll be right.
Anybody else? Right at the back there somewhere.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, kind of on a general level, really, from all of you, as a practicing vet, where do we go to report welfare cases and things that we're suspicious of? I mean, I've tried to report things before to trading standards, and they don't do animal welfare anymore because they haven't got any money. I've then gone to the RSPCA, who are not interested. And I don't, as a practicing vet, I find it so frustrating because I have nowhere to report welfare cases to, and I just feel a bit kind of powerless, and nobody does anything and nobody listens.
It's a really difficult one, and I would agree that trading standards are not always very helpful. Some are better than others. I mean, yeah, I mean, we as a charity, we often get cats, strays coming into us with foreign microchips, and, you know, we report it to training standards, but it's very variable in the help we get, either in helpfulness or actually action. And it is very frustrating. I would say as regards the RSPCA, as they're not being represented here, except Chris, I suppose, but the reality is that there's so much work and not enough resource that none of the charities, if we added all our money and resources together, has enough to deal with everything. And I do think there's a real problem with the lack of interest by the government in animal welfare, because they expect the RSPCA to enforce it all, and that they don't, you know, it doesn't go through the Crown Prosecution Service. And so really perhaps we need to do something to try and get the government more interested. I can't say the current one is likely to, but...
I think the thing I would add to that is trading standards, it depends where you are. If you're in Wales, then great, you'll get support because they've got budget. If you're in England, good luck. I can't comment for Scotland. If it's a straight animal welfare, I would try and speak to the RSPCA. If the local inspector doesn't seem to be you're not getting anywhere with them, either speak to the regional chief inspector or speak to prosecutions department down in West Sussex and explain your concerns to them. Particularly if you've got concerns about, you know, non-accidental injury or something very serious, if you're not getting joy at the first stop, keep going up the ladder.
I would certainly echo that, and it is a bit of a postcode lottery, but even in England, we're dealing with a number of local authorities, and trading standards have taken more prosecutions in the last 2 years around equine matters than they ever have before. So it's not, obviously I sympathise with you, because it's obviously clearly not the case where you are, but some local authorities... Yeah. I mean, I would encourage you to report it, because obviously the intelligence of this these networks is really important to build that evidence. So I would certainly still encourage you to report it.
Keep banging on the door of the RSPCA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
Perhaps I could add 2 points to that. First one is that the major flaw in the Animal Welfare Act is that it didn't actually put a duty on anybody to enforce it. So unlike most other animal legislation, there is a duty on local authorities or APHA to enforce it. There is no duty on anybody to do it. That's why trading standards don't have any money, because they have no duty to enforce it. From the RSPCA's point of view, and I speak as a RSPCA trustee, we have about 500 people on the road dealing with every animal welfare problem in England and Wales. To put that in proportion, there are 30,000 policemen in London alone. So you can imagine how stretched those people are. But if you have a welfare issue, you should report it to the national RSPCA line. And if it's not followed up, ring up again and say, why haven't you followed it up? And they should report back to you on what action's been taken. So who's next?
Chris, can I just mention one of the things that BVA officers have been doing with our engagement with the senior civil servants within DEFRA is to try and collate all this information of non-compliance. It is very, very patchy out there with the different trading standards involvement. But if you come across non-compliances, please feed them in either via the platform or straight to BVA, and we will ensure that they're fired up the chain as raw sort of anecdotal evidence of what's going on the ground.
Thank you, John.
I've got a question for Roly. I was wondering what you think's driven the sudden increase, because it seemed from what you're saying that there was a sharp increase in the excess of, or the welfare cases and the excess of horses. Do you think it was the trigger of the recession, and why is it still going up? Do you have any idea?
Straight answer is it'll be for a number of reasons, and certainly the recession is one of those. I think equine ownership has become more attainable to many. I think there is a huge issue with ignorance, and so often you find that, you know, we're in a world where there's never been so many equine courses available, and I'm sure it's exactly the same in dog and cat world. But yet there's never been so much ignorance out there, and it's just trying to sort of tackle that. But it comes back to the issue of lack of lack of stick. There is no stick for irresponsible ownership. And, I think until we can really get a better handle on that, and within the horse world, that you've got to start with knowing how to identify that animal, because, in all of these fly grazing or abandonment cases, you go and say, whose animal is it? It's not mine, Gov. And it's really difficult to pin. And indeed, the only success of the fly grazing legislation that's just come in is the fact that you don't have to prove ownership in that. And it was always the premise, because otherwise you're never going to get anywhere. So I think it is a massively complicated and lots of different reasons. But I think the recession has played a part, and I also think there was a real lag. So 2008, 2009, 2010, we didn't see much movement. But since then, I think it's been a bit of a lag, but it's sort of coming in spades now.
Thank you. Lady right at the back.
Yes, I'm up the back corner because I work for Trading Standards, hiding up here. I work for Norfolk Trading Standards, and we've done a lot of work with World Horse Welfare, and we've also worked with the RSPCA, and we deal with illegal imports of dogs. We do have a duty to deal with that, and we do deal with every one that comes through to us, which may end up in dogs being quarantined, usually at the cost of the person who's bought that puppy. As a region, I chair the East of England Regional Group of Trading Standards, and as a region we've done several projects on illegal imports. So there is a lot of work going on. You might not know about it. And yes, in some locations, Trading Standards don't have a budget for specific things, but they do have a duty to deal with illegally imported dogs.
The problem from my experience is the Trading Standards departments and the quarantine kennels cope fine when it's 1 or 2. When you ring them up and say you've got 50, there aren't the quarantine spaces left. What do you do with them? Where do you put 50 dogs? That's a quarter of the quarantine spaces in the UK. The quarantine industry is a private business. They don't have a quarter of the thing sitting empty. And not from Trading Standards point of view, but getting advice from anybody as to what to do with 50 dogs that you believe to be illegally imported, and what stage can you rehome them, and what should you do with them, is not out there.
No, but on an individual basis, we would deal, if we had that come in, we would have to deal with it, and we would have to come up with a solution.
I can't comment for Norfolk, but I can say that the Trading Standards departments that I have had that come up with haven't been able to deal with it and have just buried their heads in the sand because they haven't had the resources to be able to deal with it. And they said there isn't the facilities to deal with it in the UK because they haven't got the quarantine kennels. We've had to create, effectively, our own quarantine wing at an RSPCA kennel.
If the people who own those dogs would not be prepared to pay for them to be quarantined, you can have the animals put to sleep. So, yeah, that might not tick everyone's box as an answer, but it's stopping possibly illegally imported animals coming into this country as a rabies risk.
And certainly from our experience with the strays that we have coming with foreign microchips, we have had some quite dubious advice from some of the trading standards. There was one where it was an adult stray and it was found near a foreign lorry port, so there was a high chance that it had come in illegally, and that it was had been taken into one of our volunteers' homes, and we were told, well, we'll get someone back to you in 5 days. It is a bit unacceptable, I feel, but we have tried to talk to DEFRA about it, but haven't really got anywhere.
Did anybody see Johnny Depp walking his dogs around Hyde Park? But seriously, when you get that sort of publicity from somebody who is of that sort of profile, it doesn't help our cause, I don't think. Sean.
Sean Wensley, PDSA and BVA. I always thought there were 3 brilliant presentations, and I just wanted to endorse Maggie's messages from a PDSA perspective. Thanks to the knowledge transfer and the awareness raising of the cat population control group, we've relatively recently relaunched 4-month neutering across our PDSA hospitals. But before we just did a bit of staff research to understand what's currently happening and get a sense of what possible barriers might be. And the 3 initiatives that they welcomed in particular, our clinical teams, were that there be a clear protocol and a sort of just understanding of what's the desirable, but also that the evidence for it be disseminated, which was really helpful, the documents from the cat population control group and the websites that you mentioned, and also that they appreciated some time within their busy working lives to be able to debate and discuss what they were hearing. So it wasn't just that they were to be told, but they really valued sort of a mini session like this to better understand the issues and good practice. So we'll continue to audit it, but it's been widely accepted and apparently very effective.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That's great. I mean, the more practices that do that, and obviously, you know, the larger corporate practices as well, then, you know, the better. Because we want it to become standard and not be seen as something that's different. And quite frankly, from a surgical point of view, I really would say it's easier. So, you know, right.
I just wonder actually whether there's anybody from any of the large corporate practices who'd like to comment on their protocols. I'm being very shy.
Liz Ormerod, AWF Regional Rep for Scotland and Society for Companion Animal Studies. I thought these were three really important presentations and I'd like to thank all the speakers. I've got 2 points. I think as a profession we should be encouraging people to come to our practices before they get an animal. Point them in the right direction, warn them of the pitfalls, help to match them with a species and a suitable source. About puppy farming, I got involved some years ago with trying to help investigative journalists investigate what was happening in very large pet shops in the Northwest that were getting puppy farm pups. I went in undercover, I was in disguise, but even so I was recognised by somebody in the organisation and I got a warning phone call from a prisoner in the local prison. I'd been delivering beneficial programmes to prisoners in the Northwest and one of them phoned to warn me that he'd recognised me or that I'd been recognised and do not mess with these guys. The high-end criminals, organised crime, working out of Manchester and Liverpool, they pack guns and they will use them. They are top-end criminals. They're not just wide boys. They're gangsters.
I think the thing to say is don't underestimate. I think they're stupid. The guys who used to be selling puppies in lay-bys, some of them have learnt from their mistakes and worked out why they got caught doing it and have evolved better systems. And they have come from other illegal industries and moved into puppies because of the low penalties and the high returns.
Paula Boyd and Dogs Trust, just really to emphasise, David mentioned that we need about 800,000 puppies a year. We're on a collision course. Kennel Club register about 250,000, of which probably no more than 10% are through assured breeders. Rescue, rehome, probably about another 150,000. So where do the other 400,000 puppies come from? And we have to be mindful. I think the two things that have come out of this discussion from a puppy perspective, one are the puppy farms and two are the illegal entries. If we shut one down, it's going to be the law of unintended consequences for the other. So as much as I hesitate to say it, should we be working with puppy farms to improve their standards to something that we are comfortable with? Should we be encouraging the Kennel Club to, in some way, encourage more people to become assured breeders? But it's something we're going to have to face because we're on a collision course at the moment.
David?
I agree. We've got to do something. There is a total undersupply of puppies, it seems, and these guys have been able to tap into this by using other sources of supply. And the fact that the prices have got so high surely shows that there is an undersupply of dogs.
Again, just to put it in perspective, Kennel Club are getting about 10,000 hits a day on their puppy finder, just to put a scale on it.
Maggie, there must be a similar issue with the supply of cats.
Well, there isn't really. I think we're very far from being at the stage where there aren't enough cats and kittens. Obviously, only about 10% of cats are pedigree, so there isn't quite the same sort of money to be made in pedigree cats. Although, I mean, David just said to me today that he'd come across the first case of people illegally importing cats. which is a sad thing. There's other things which I think are concerning along these lines in cats, and that's the sort of increasing popularity of hybrids, wildcat hybrids. And some of those are being sold for huge amounts of money. And so that's something that I think may become more criminalised. But at the moment, there are plenty of cats to go around. But it's trying to encourage people to take one from a rescue rather than necessarily going onto the internet and paying, £100 for a moggy kitten there.
I judged a fun dog show at a welfare organisation recently, and 50% of the puppies, 50% of the dogs have been bought over the internet. Roly, are we ever going to have a problem with horses?
We certainly don't have a lack of problem with horses. Obviously, we have a lack of 13-2 ridden ponies for your daughter, which is bomb-proof. But you'll still see some animals. Obviously, not at the top end of the market, but still going for a good amount of money. But there's a huge tail. Just to pick up on one thing Maggie said, a real problem we have in the equine world is people very rarely think of going to a rescue centre. And actually, so it's one of the things that we've been working very hard on over the last few years. Is when people say we're thinking of buying a pony and they go off down to the local sales. Actually, one of the best things you can do, you can go to an RSPCA or World Horse Welfare, or Blue Cross, Red Wings, or anywhere, because you're never going to get a better vetted animal than you are through. That's the reality. But getting that message across is a bit of a challenge.
Okay, David first, and there's a lady right at the back.
David Williams. I'm an Eastern rep for AWF. Actually, I was just going to say exactly that. I've just become a trustee of Wood Green Animal Shelter, and again, just the number of dogs needed and the number of dogs that are available in rescue centres. There must be a connect there that we can just tell owners to be looking for animals.
We need to make
from
staffies as fashionable as Labradoodles.
Yeah, indeed.
We do.
Hi. Lady at the back somewhere.
Yeah, Helena Duffy, AVS president at the moment. I just kind of wanted to raise a point that a lot of people do go to charities, and from personal and sort of other anecdotal information, it is very difficult sometimes to get an animal off a charity. And you're saying perhaps, charities can start working with puppy farms, sort of lesser of two evils sort of thing, but perhaps slackening the ways that people can get animals from charities, because then surely when they can't get them from the RSPCA or whatever, because they're very stringent rules, then that's when they go to the internet afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real issue, and I think all of us who work for the major animal welfare charities would say that. Certainly, we have decreased the number of home visits we do, because we used to home visit nearly everyone who was getting a cat from Cats Protection. And I do think it's actually quite a barrier. I personally wouldn't like someone to come around to my house and tell me whether I was good enough to have a cat. And obviously matching the right animal to the right home is really, really important. So there does need to be discussion and this sort of thing, but it doesn't have to be perhaps the onerous sort of, jumping through hoops that it's been in the past. And I think quite a lot of charities are decreasing things like home visits, certainly Battersea is, and several of the other charities. And I think we do need to go further, because I think we have a lot of staff and volunteers who do an awful lot of work to rehabilitate these cats. And so they do feel, I want to get that perfect home. And it's trying to get people to understand that a moderately good home is much better than that animal being in a pen. And I do think we've got work to do. I think things are improving, but I think we really, really do need to work harder. I've got, a friend who's a vet who was turned down for a dog from the RSPCA. So, yes, there's work to be done on that, definitely.
Thank you. Peter.
Peter Scott, vetting practice. It strikes me that Paula's point about law of unintended consequences is already operating. We've spent the last X years campaigning against pet shops supplying puppies, when at least pet shops have a degree of regulation and inspection and approval. Instead, we've moved it to the guy who now can make more money by selling puppies than a bit of heroin. He's certainly not going to do as long inside. We've created a market for these guys to operate in. But the one encouraging side of it is that if we're listened to that degree, that we can create a new market. Perhaps we can, by giving the right advice, try to encourage people, if not to pet shops, and shift the trade back to pet shops, perhaps to push people far more towards rescues. Because that's really what we need to be looking at, is getting the animals out of rescues. But I honestly think as a profession, we've been giving the wrong advice for the last 5-10 years.
I think the one problem with that is two problems with that. The general public want puppies. A lot of the public do nowadays, they want fashionable, cute, little handbag dogs. They don't want rescue dogs. They want puppies. And the other big problem is a lot of the public see puppies like they see anything else as a commodity. If they want a book, they go on the internet, they order it from Amazon, it's here tomorrow. They want to do the same with puppies. They just want to bung in Google, I want a Maltese Terrier, and it will ping up with someone who'll give them one in 2-3 hours' time. Give you a phone number, ring it up, go round, I've got my puppy. Job done. That little amount of thought. Yeah. And yes, I'd love them all to come to the practices, get advice, and think about what they're doing beforehand. But we've gone to an internet, instant access, instant supply society.
And I think that charities need to use the internet. I mean, many do, but to use it even better so that people can actually very quickly look at what is available, and at least then, it doesn't feel such an onerous process.
A chap called Mark Abraham over at the back there.
Great discussion. Thanks again, panel. Loads of points raised today, and they're all fascinating, but I wanted to just make a few clearer ones. We're all responsible for this trade, and I'll tell you why. The guy who says that pet shops is a good idea, the legislation for pet shops is 1951. It's totally outdated. It doesn't take into account the pet's emotional or developmental needs, and it only legislates for that part of the whole puppy farming chain. So unfortunately, pet shops is not a great way forward. In order to sell all these puppies coming in, you actually need a pet shop license. So that's one way where this can be tackled by legislating with only seeing the puppy with its mum. Also, the internet. We've all mentioned the internet being responsible, and it plays a major part. My question to Paula from the Dogs Trust, who oversees the Parliamentary Animals Advertising Group, is it's clearly not working. For those of you who don't know, the PARG Group is a voluntary scheme where websites such as the ones that were on that slide actually volunteer to be part of something that actually isn't legislation. And if their adverts are a bit dodgy or represent strange animals or puppy farming, they just get taken down. And we all know that they just get being put up again. So is legislation going to be introduced, tightened up, or changed in any way that can actually prevent these animals being advertised? Because it's quite clear that if you can't advertise these animals online, then it's going to be a lot harder to buy them. And finally, not many of you will know the irony of the slide on at the moment, and that's that Pets at Home, who own Vets for Pets, Pets at Home are very anti puppies being banned from pet shops, because as with shared directorship of the Pet Industry Federation, who are trying to keep pets in pet shops, because they fear that banning puppies or kittens is going to lead to a ban on all other animals in pet shops. So as much of the corruption we talk about today being from organised crime, there's a lot of corruption going on in our industry that needs to be addressed. And I'll give you one example, and I will shut up eventually. But last year, when I had my debate in the House of Commons, as a result of my petition of over 100,000, we had leaked emails from the Pet Industry Federation telling the government and MPs, whatever they do, to vote no or abstain from a vote on banning puppies and kittens with their mums. And we fear that is the reason, that they fear that's a sliding slope to banning all animals. So as much as the corruption that you've mentioned, panel, there's corruption going on in this industry, and we all really need to work together now, because it's getting out of hand. The PARG Group for advertising doesn't work. The pet shop legislation doesn't work. Nothing's working. So we all need to now be a part of change, be proud of being a part of change, and actually work together to stop puppy farming, improve rescue adoption rates, and move forward. Thanks.
And I think certainly we need to be more sort of innovative in the way we try to encourage people to take animals from rescues. And actually, we're doing a project with Pets at Home. And as a charity, we were criticised in the press for doing this because we are homing cats through a Pets at Home store in Newbury. Now, they're not kittens, they are adult cats, and many of them have been at our Newbury Centre for many months. And what is really interesting is we worked really, really hard designing really, really good facilities for the cats because we knew we'd be under great scrutiny for doing this project. But our thoughts were, there's a huge footfall here, so a lot of our centres are really hard to find because it's hard to get planning permission for catteries, and so often people can't find them. So actually, if rescues are going to be homing more animals, they need to be in accessible places. So we have 3 pens in the Pets at Home at Newbury. We've homed over 100 cats through 3 pens in a year, and some of the cats were in our Newbury Centre for 6 months, and they were homed in 2 days going to Pets at Home. And they're actually less stressed there because the pens are so well designed. There's really good soundproofing, there's lots of places for the cats to hide. So I think we have to really look at different ways of trying to home rescued animals. And we do have to work together, and sometimes that means working with what may sometimes be seen as the enemy, and try and provide animals in places where people go, and they can be rescue animals rather than people looking on the internet.
I'd also just add from a pet advisory, the PAR group. I mean, you made some really good points, but I think one needs to be slightly careful with terminology because I don't think PARG has been a total failure at all. I think there has been some real good that's come out of it. It's certainly not a perfect system, and obviously I'm speaking it from an equine side, and I know the massive part of it is on small animals. But so I just think there is no the likelihood of all of these things. These are hugely complicated issues, and there's not going to be a single sort of magic solution. But I think you raised a really good point. Unless we work together collectively. And actually vets really do stand up and take our part in doing that, then we are going to struggle.
David, anything to add?
I'd echo what both Maggie and Roly have said.
I'd give Paula the right of reply, I think.
Thanks, Chris. And really just to follow up on Roly's comments as well, we have to bear in mind that obviously we're working against a backdrop of a government that are reluctant to bring in any more legislation. We also have to bear in mind that we are in a very much an IT age where most of us do our research on the internet, even if we don't follow through on the internet. The challenge with saying, well, it's not working, let's just ban internet advertising, it's impossible to police. And the analogy I would give you is, for example, online sale of medicines. The VMD only have jurisdiction over websites within the UK. So the clever individuals will actually just pop up a website in another country where the VMD has no jurisdiction. So what they can do with the UK medicines online sales is actually give them some sort of accreditation to say, yes, that they're UK-based, they're approved. PARG, yes, it's not perfect. However, it has made some improvements. We know with Gumtree, which was one of the first online advertisers that PARG worked with, the number of adverts on their site went down dramatically. But the challenge is obviously they do pop up elsewhere. So it is, as Roly's already said, it's collaborative working. But just to ban it is really not going to be the solution, I'm afraid.
Okay. One comment too about RSPCA in pet shops. We also have rehoming centres in some of the Pets at Home shops, and they are extraordinarily successful because of the footfall, because people go there wanting animals.
Emma Milne, ex-AWF trustee, now ambassador. Sounds more grand. I was just going to say, I think it was fantastic, really, really fantastic presentations. But I do wonder whether some of it, we need to tackle it from the other side, and it comes up a lot in welfare debates where a lot of European countries are ahead of us with making sure that the prospective owners have to prove that they are responsible and that they have to prove that they've had some sort of training and are capable of looking after the animals that they're going to take on. And of course that would need enforcing as well, but I think we're all sort of talking about the baddies at the other end, but actually we need massive work done on owner or prospective owner education and making the right choices. But also from the point of view of when Peter says we've been giving the wrong advice, I think we've been giving the right advice, but as David pointed out, they're getting round it. But one of the other things that we should mention today is that the AWF puppy contract and puppy information pack that was made with the RSPCA is fantastic. So if prospective owners, if they're being duped with a mother, a house, all that setup, if they had that puppy information pack and asked for all those things that are in there, it would get around a lot of bad breeding practices. So anyone in practice who can promote that bit of kit, which is on the internet where everyone goes, we should be pushing that as much as possible.
Yeah, and we're hoping to design a kitten one to give people looking for a kitten advice on what to look for.
It's not really the contract, it's the PIP, which is the real thing, the puppy information pack, which has all the information about the way the animals have been bred. Lady in the middle now. Just speak.
It strikes me that one thing that's coming out here is education. You're saying people want puppies. They want it now. And surely part of what we should be doing is educating them that you can't just treat animals as I want it now commodities. We should be educating people as much as we can, using the internet, get some of the high-profile people to start pushing the message that no, you should not be looking for your designer puppy, that you should be looking, that the thing to do is actually to take something from rescue home. Has anyone started that? Trying to get some of the high-profile people, the high-profile websites, to get behind the message of encouraging people to go to a rescue centre rather than going for the cute puppy?
I think there probably are plenty of people who are trying to push the idea of rescue over puppy, but the problem is the puppy comes with cuteness, and that seals the heart. I think a lot of people are doing, and from the cases I've looked at where people have been duped and bought puppies, they are doing their research into the breed and what the dog needs, etc., etc., etc. It is the final stage when they're going impulsive. They're then starting to look for a breeder. They're seeing an advert, they're ringing them up and they're offering them a puppy tomorrow. And they're getting carried away with themselves rather than thinking, I want to see this puppy at 3-4 weeks old with the mother, and then I want to go back in a month's time and collect the puppy. Because if people do that, these dealers will not be able to do that. They want puppies in and gone in 2 or 3 days before they have a chance to get sick.
Okay, last question.
I was just going to suggest that, so part of it is impression, part of it is fashion. Let's make the older pets fashionable, the geriatric older ones. Yeah. Heck, let's call it 50 Shades of Grey.
Thank you very much. Okay, just remains then for me to thank all of you for your questions and for our panel of speakers who I think deserve another round of applause. Thank you very much.